Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at a new devblog for the next major update, and this is the Vijayanta. It's a new tank which is actually coming in for India, of all nations. Now, India is going to be in the British tree. This one's going to be at rank 5, and also a premium. If I was going to hazard a guess, my feelings on this vehicle is this kind of is to gauge how interesting or interested people are into Indian vehicles. Just because it's a kind of idea we've seen a lot, where you have initial premium vehicles added in, then sometimes event vehicles, and then sub or independent tech trees. So we'll have to see how the Vijayanta comes in. Even though it's a pretty simple machine, it may have quite large ramifications. Let's have a look at the history of this vehicle. In 1961, the Indian government and British Vickers Armstrong Company signed an agreement to build a tank factory in the Awadhi area near Chennai, formerly Madras, to assemble the Vickers Mark I tanks for the Indian Army. The first tank that in India received the name Vijayanta, or Victorious, left the assembly line in 1965. And soon, the Indian plant mastered the independent production of tank components. During service life, the Vijayanta tank was upgraded and received a new fire control system. The production of the tank continued until 1989, after which the Vijayanta began to be replaced in the army by the Russian T-72 M1. With it being the first Indian tank in War Thunder, the Vijayanta could have some pretty large ramifications. If this tank sells well, or if this tank is shown interest, maybe it means that a bunch of other things will be worked on in the future for India. It also may mean that stuff is already being worked on for India, since India does have quite a few unique machines, obviously the Arjun being one which everybody brings up, but also the simple fact that it does have a lot of copycat machines as well, which could easily slot in as squadron vehicles or standard tech tree vehicles for different nations, depending on where people want to put it. There's also some unique Indian aviation, which is quite nice to see as well. And at the end of the day, India as a nation is huge. One of the things that India also really likes doing is mobile gaming, which isn't really useful for the main game of War Thunder, but since you know War Thunder Mobile is coming out and is in open beta right now, that pretty much means that that will expand to that market, and therefore more people will get involved. And since a lot of vehicles in the standard game are in the mobile game, it wouldn't be a surprise if a vehicle like the Vijayanta made it into it. And I think that's something that's just going to keep on going forward. With expanding markets means expanding countries in War Thunder, and hopefully it means that there will be no more independent nations, and instead we'll get a Finland-Sweden scenario with subtrees, or South Africa and Britain, for example. We saw also a bunch of new voice lines, which they've stuck into the game, and many different ones from many different nations, including Korea, Vietnam, and also even Australia. So that would be where the kind of growth of the vehicles in the games would come from, compared to other nations which are already pretty fleshed out. The Vijayanta is very similar to the Vickers Mark I. The major differences between it is it has an IR searchlight on it, it also has some side skirts, and also it has the L7A1. Which is a pretty nice gun. You know, it has the 2-plane stabilizer, has the 5-second reload, which is the big part of it. But the main addition to this gun, compared to the British one, is it gets access to a Heat FS round. Now, a Heat FS round is fantastic for the 105, because you have a few issues with the APDS sometimes. Sometimes it decides to shatter, which obviously isn't very good, and then the Heat FS can just kind of go through targets and push through and deal a ton of damage, which is quite nice to things. So for me, this vehicle as a premium will be really good, and on the dev server, it did feel very nice. The Vickers in general as a vehicle is super fun to play in War Thunder. It's a very mobile medium tank, doesn't really have great armor. There's nothing really to note about that side of things. But when it comes to its mobility, when it comes to its gun and its reload, both of these are incredibly impressive for the vehicle. It's also an interesting BR for the British. This thing was at 8.0 on the dev server, which is okay. You know, it's not that bad. It's just in a bit of a weird BR. Like for me, when it comes to 7.3 and 7.7. The British are incredibly strong. The Conqueror, the Carnarvon, the Centurion Mark III and 10, you know, the FV4202, all of these machines will feel very similar to the Vijayanta. But then you've got the Chieftains, which starts off at 8.3 and then 8.7 and then 9.0, and it's not exactly as easy. Then you got also the ATGM carriers that are getting pretty heavily nerfed in the next update, unless something changes on how their missiles go. So the Vijayanta may kind of just be sat by itself. You know, there is other vehicles like the Vickers Mark III, which maybe you could run it with, but you've just got to be careful of these things. The combo, the Vijayanta and also the Vampire, though, does sound like a very spicy one. The Vampire is incredibly good in ground forces because you can get the two 1,000-pound bombs off and then play a dogfighting defensive role on the battlefield. So that sounds pretty tantalizing. So a vehicle which has access to mobility, a vehicle that has access to a 5-second reload, and the L7, and also the good old Heat FS, is always going to do well at these BRs. It's going to feel really nice to play. And the simple fact is you'll out-reload most of the stuff that you face. You'll be able to be more mobile than a lot of the big medium tanks that exist. And also the profile means that you'll be slightly lower than others. You just can't count on the armor on this thing, and that's completely fine. Because of the stabilizer, you're able to get the first shot off in most engagements, especially since the targeting speed on the turret ain't too bad compared to other things. The IR spotlight will pretty much be useless, but at least it'll look nice, I suppose. Maybe every so often you'll get that Alaska map which has been nuked to try and improve it and, you know, make use of it. But yeah, it's not really going to do too much. It does have smoke grenades. It has, of course, guns on it. It has, I believe, a 50 cal and two 30s or something similar to that. And generally it should be all good. I just wish that we saw a subtree for India and this vehicle would be kind of the center point of it. But since there was an upgraded version of the Vijayanta, maybe we'll get either that or the previous version in the tech tree, and then also all the other Indian vehicles. Hopefully this is a first step towards Indian stuff. India is an incredibly interesting nation with an incredibly interesting history. And as a person who's been reading a lot about their Second World War setup, basically fighting for both sides, the fight for independence, and also the fight for many different things, it's very interesting to see their vehicles finally in game. And hopefully that means, alongside of the gameplay and alongside of all of that, the history of India can be told, which is one of the strong points of War Thunder compared to many other games. The fact that you can expand into history and help people learn not just about the vehicles, but the countries that they come from. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Millie Draper, Juan the Panda, Nick R. Kupila, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie B. Young, Peter Grayling, Jerry Provolt, Bareen, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, Derek R. and Lafouche for supporting the channel.